Hey everyone, and now that we've got folks here, welcome back to Asians Represent. This is our second episode on wuxia. Their second episode, like true episode on wuxia. This is also the second time Johnny has
Thanks
been
for
on
having me
Asians Represent.
back.
I mean, thanks for the work that you do. And thanks for your insight. I'm super hyped because this is actually part one of a two-part video series that we're doing on wuxia. The next one, Agatha is leading. I'm it's
Yes.
next one. Agatha and I had a conversation, and we were just like, Daniel is super unqualified to lead this one because it's
Okay.
gonna.
Okay, to be
No,
fair,
I
that
said
was
that.
not the
I
actual
no,
conversation.
it's
I
not.
wasn't like, Daniel,
No, well,
will you
I
talk?
self-identify as unqualified to do that episode.
I'll self-identify.
I said, look, I'm not qualified to do this one, but like Agatha is because the last episode we did on wuxia with Yilin, like you also led, and I was kind of just like, tell me more.
That episode
Tell me
was
all the
so
things.
hype.
That was the episode was hype. We'll link that one. That one was only on the audio feed on our original audio feed. So I'm excited for people to kind of take a look at those. But yeah, we've got this episode is going to be a wuxia and D&D, specifically how it's portrayed in 5th edition D&D and how it can and maybe can't improve. And then our next episode on wuxia is going to be on the sort of the nitty gritty of the wuxia literary genres. We're going to talk about like Jin Yong and like all of those, all the subsequent influences on the genre. So, wanted to be clear, we're doing two separate episodes. So today we could focus on like the D&D. But before we even dive into wuxia news, do we have any news? Anything you want to share? I know like Johnny, you're working on the English materials for Path of Wuxia, which I
Yes,
am like so unbelievably hyped for. Like,
especially it has zombie stuff in it.
well, now that I know it's got zombie stuff, it's like
Mm-hmm.
I gotta play it now. But last time we spoke, you said that only the first act or chapter or season you said has been translated, right?
It's playable throughout like both years. Like the first act is way more polished than the second act. We're still working on it. I have some time this month. I'm gonna put some more time into it. Hopefully we'll be able to wrap up stuff by like I would say like October. I'll
My
ping you guys and we'll be able to get most of the main storylines polished through.
maybe we'll stream it. I'm
Oh my gosh, yes.
maybe we'll stream it. I'm hyped because like I October's my birthday. I'm gonna take some time off, and I'm looking forward to playing this game. I will be playing Path of Wuxia in October. I can't
It's
wait.
it's it's a fun mix of like, visual novel and tactics.
I've never played a visual
And
novel. Like I don't
Well, oh
like
yeah, we were supposed
we were
to.
going to, and it just we never got around to it. But maybe this could
you'll
be
enjoy it.
the first visual novel. I don't know.
You'll enjoy it. You'll
Yay.
Uh,
enjoy it.
but
I've
Johnny,
enjoyed it. I have like what, over 100 hours on it already.
oh
Some
damn.
people have like 300 hours, but like I have to like go back and work on stuff to like make it through. Nope, I have 84.7 hours on it.
So is this of play as well? Like
No,
so
this is
how,
me playing through multiple times because you're not, the game isn't designed for you to like consume all the content at once because it moves on a timeline very much like Persona. So you
I've
can't
never
see all of
I
your
don't I've
friends.
never played Persona. I
Okay.
don't know how
So
that
you have
works.
like friends in your
I've
like
also.
group that you can do side quests with, but time moves faster than you can like level up your relationship with them. So you have to play through multiple times to see everyone's side story.
Oh, so you can't be
Oh.
like, okay, I'm gonna work on this one, and then later I'll do this one. Like you have to be
No, no,
so
no.
like the story moves, and you just kind of have to
Yeah,
flow with it.
you have to flow with it. You have to select who you
Oh.
want to like, build relationships with.
Is the
And
Oh,
they also have their
interesting.
own like they also have their own like
Side
learnings and
quests?
growth of what it means for their own path of wuxia.
oh their own path of wuxia?
Yeah,
That's the
you're
That's
title.
all
so
on this like story
cute.
of like this whole time you're just like trying to figure out, what is my path, right? And everyone else is in this like discovery place of their own path as well.
Wait, so do your decisions affect what kind of path you take, or is it kind of like you
Your
generally end up
decisions
taking
will
this?
affect things further down like the timeline. Like there are specific points where it's like a very key decision, and one decision will like result in one outcome a little bit later on, but then other dishes will give a different outcome because certain people aren't there anymore.
Because they're dead.
I was literally about to say, this sounds so wholesome, and Agatha's like, because they're dead.
I mean, yes,
It's like
part of the discussions of the whole Batman question is at what point is someone no longer redeemable?
oh snap. And then of course, and then there's zombies. Then they throw out zombies.
Oh, it asks a very deep question when it gets to that one.
Well, I actually want to circle back to the whole zombies thing when we're talking about wuxia, but also
Okay.
shinsha. Because I want to
Okay.
talk about that. I want to talk about
Okay.
zombies and stuff like that within the genre and what you can kind of include. And I got to,
Okay.
first of all, apologize. Steve, I'm so sorry I've never played Persona.
It's okay.
I haven't either.
I don't like the Persona games precisely because of what Johnny has said. Because
Oh,
the game puts you in a very awkward position where you can't do everything. You're going to I feel like I'm going to disappoint someone, and I get a lot of anxiety when I play Persona games. Which, like, obviously that's a me problem. Like, obviously Persona games I have a lot of respect for, but I can't play them because.
So you don't like that the game literally gives you FOMO, like
Yes.
virtual FOMO.
It's also a reason why I can't play a lot of dating sims.
Mhm.
I'm currently playing Boyfriend Dungeon. I understand some of the complexities around how certain themes are handled, but
Yeah.
Boyfriend Dungeon does allow me to romance a lot of people at the same time, and
Oh.
everyone is consensual to this. And I'm like, that's a really interesting
Oh.
concept.
Yeah. See, I'm on the other end of that, and I'm playing Skyrim right now, and you could just do everything.
Exactly.
There's no order.
Yeah.
All I'm doing is hunting.
I really
Right.
want us to do like a stream of one of these dating sims together. I feel like that would be so fun for all of us to just.
I think we 100% should, and I think we can.
Yeah.
I think we could figure out a way to do it with Path of Wusha. I think we could do it. We'll figure out a way to do it. I'll look into
So
it.
I will say there are a lot of romanceable characters in there. We have not yet figured out if same-sex romance is allowed yet.
Oh,
We believe that there is a way to make a mod so that you can do a same-sex romance.
Oh,
We
because
believe
but
that
I
that's
guess
it's
the
not.
original. Because okay, for clarity, for those who
Yeah.
are listening or watching, you are not one of the devs.
I am not one of the devs. I'm just making a fan mod.
Yeah.
I am a fan mod that is doing a fan mod translation. I have no official affiliation with Hello Studios or any of their
Yeah.
or
And they just
affiliates.
didn't. They just didn't put that in their game.
Yeah, so we think it's just a small change that we can make to allow people to, based off of the data structure of the game, I think it's just something that is like a gender lock thing that you just need to be like, have the character accept both. We don't know yet. We haven't, because they haven't gone that far into the game. You can't advance to the last levels of the relationship.
Right.
So we'll see.
Well, I'm hyped to like stream this in October. You're gonna have to teach me how to install mods on Steam.
Yeah.
Apparently, I don't know how to do that.
You have instructions. It's all good. Anyways,
Read the instructions. But anyways, that's what you.
we'll have instructions. I meant
That-
it's like
that-
we do have instructions.
That's
on
literally
how
just
to-
like
it's easy.
Daniel, I'm not gonna help you. Go read the fucking instructions.
easy.
No, it's easy. It's
Oh,
literally
no.
download the mod, throw it in the folder, and you're good.
What folder? No,
Anyways.
I'm hyped. But that said, like you're working on that.
Yep.
Anything else you got going on related to wuxia?
Um,
I should say because I'm sure you have a busy life.
Not really, actually. Not related to Wusha.
Respect.
Just more. I'm actually rereading Is Wusha right now because my friend Vivid Foundry is in this chat.
Yeah.
And they absolutely love this thing, so I'm rereading it to keep up with them. But that's Shinsha, which is a whole different story, which leads us back to the question that you had. What can you include in Wusha?
Yeah, so that's okay. We're gonna save that.
Okay.
Because we still gotta do Steve and Agatha. What have you got going on?
Well, Unbreakable was announced. It's out. The PDF is available. I'm an editor in Revolution and an editor and also in the D&D 5e as well. But the Revolution one, of course, all my praise. I think it's really fucking dope to have an entire volume or anthology or whatever you want to call it, text devoted to revolutions where we focus just on Asian voices and a wide range of Asian voices, even more than we had in Unbreakable Volume 1. That is really, really fucking dope. Like it's just so cool.
And if you haven't purchased Unbreakable Volume 2 yet and you're watching us on Twitch right now, you can actually scroll down and there's a little image of the cover, click on that, and it'll take you right to get yourself a copy of Unbreakable. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll throw that in the description down below. Yeah, super hyped about Unbreakable. I worked on Revolution and the D&D one as well. So that's really exciting. And it's cool to see that you're still involved with that, Steve, because I think you bring a lot to the table there.
The other news I had is that I'm hitting the gym a lot, but I gotta say, I am so fucking pissed at people that show up without a mask on, and then when they have no mask on and they do bicep curls in the squat rack, literally the dregs of society. Just whatever space those people are living in, zero respect for them. And I just want to put that out there because I think that energy needs to exist in the universe. That's all I gotta say about that.
I do appreciate how you've been not only posting. Oh no, hold up! I'm not being sarcastic. I do appreciate how you're posting that you're working out and staying fit, because that is a part of that. You have to take care of your body, but I also really love how you're like, I have the privilege of being able to go to a gym, but I do everything in my power to make sure that that you, Steve, and those around you are safe, and you hold others accountable to it. And I think that's very important. Like, it's very important. So much respect. How about you, Agatha? Do you have anything else going on? Anything you want to announce?
No, actually, nothing on the gaming end.
Well,
so I've been...
Agatha and I signed a very interesting NDA the other day.
I didn't realize we can say
we're not saying
NDA.
we can say that we signed an NDA, but not for. But it's
because people like you, people are going to start putting NDAs on their NDAs. So you cannot disclose that you have a non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah.
So that you can say you signed an NDA to an NDA.
Yeah, there we go. There's layers to it.
Hey, can't stop us.
You can't stop us. Agatha and Daniel will find a way. But yeah, we something potentially cool in the future. I do have to say this from an Asians Represent side. I want to thank everyone who voted for us for the Ennies. It's cool that we out there, but this year was really cool because there were so many Asian people who got nominated for Ennies, or Asian folks who worked on products that are nominated for Ennies. I think this is a great start. And again, like I said before, the Ennies are a deeply flawed system, but the Ennies are still a huge thing for marginalized creators. And simply winning one is a huge change, like really big positive career boost for somebody. So I'm happy that, we could be critical of the Ennies, just like we're critical of Wizards of the Coast, but also support our community members. So yeah, really happy that everyone turned out to help us out. In terms of, I think that's it for we have one other piece of Asians Represent news. Gen Con. We are currently collaborating with Gen Con to do an online 2-hour high-Q anime volleyball high school one-shot. Agatha's going to be in it alongside Kevin, who's going to be running Volley Boys. And then we also have John Ryomasa, Charu, who contributed to Unbreakable Revolution, who we also have to have on the show to talk about their work in Unbreakable. And we're waiting for one other person to get confirmation. Once we're all done, we'll put out an official announcement. But you heard it first. We're actually going to be the first show to do a sports anime one-shot at Gen Con. Again,
so fucking good.
Again, look, you know what?
New ground.
No, breaking new. No, honestly, I'll say this. So when Gen Con approached me and I was like, okay, what do you want, a panel or a game? They're like, oh, let's do a game. I'm like, cool. I have 2 ideas, and I was like half expecting them to pick one, and you could assume which one I expected them to pick. I was like, we could do a sports high school drama, or we'll do like a ninja thing. And Gen Con was like, let's do the sports high school thing because we've never done that before.
Yeah.
And and they want to see that. And I was like, let's go. So I'm excited for that one. Tentatively going to be on September 19th. We'll have more details to release soon. So I'm super hyped for that. I've got one piece of news. I actually got in trouble. I sort of got in trouble. I'm working on Into the Motherlands. So yeah. I'm working on Into the Motherlands doing mechanical design. Tanya DePass and I are working on another project together that's like NDA'd and we can't talk about. But that's been going so well that Tanya was like, hey, do you want to work on Motherlands? And I said, yes, but on one condition. And that condition is that I don't do anything world building related, because that is not my story to tell. So I am only working on mechanics for Into the Motherlands. But Tanya called me out during a meeting and was like, Daniel, your tweet, you did not sound excited.
Just a little bit of feedback.
Just a little bit of feedback. Like,
Not
Daniel,
enough exclamation
I got
marks.
like a bone to pick with you. It was funny because like I thought it was being like, oh, this is like being like coy with it, because like the Motherlands Twitter released that I was doing it, and so I tweeted, I guess I should probably announce this, and then I said I'm really excited, but I was trying to be like, I guess this is, I don't know, I thought I was being coy, and Tanya was like, not enough excitement. But yeah, super hyped to be on that. And then I know Norden, Werewolf Fields, is also working on that. So I'm hyped. I'm hyped. But that said, let's talk about D&D. Let's talk about Wusha. Do we want to first start by reading the sections, or do we want to go into what Wusha is? Because I could see this going in two directions. One, we could read it and then be like, okay, here's what Wusha is. Or we could be like, okay, let's talk about Wusha and Shinsha and then go into this. Johnny, you're the guest. What do you think?
I think if we start reading it, we're gonna like stop every sentence and be like, nope, and just like nitpicking it. So
okay,
that's my worry, is that we're gonna get too far deep into like what they say.
I also have a slight preference to better define it, because although we have that great episode Asian to Present, which I've listened to multiple times because it's actually one of my favorite ones. Wusha is not something I've really grown up with. Like it's always been on the periphery, but I've talked about this. Like I have very loose Chinese roots. My roots really are in Vietnamese culture, and then I was born in the West and raised in the West. So although I understand some of the tropes, like when I watch Kung Fu Hustle, I'm like, I think I know that's a reference to something. That's about as far as I can go. Like it's like a gut feel somewhere in the brain, but I have no ways to actually express it using words.
Okay, so why don't we talk about, well, let's first start then with what Wusha is, right? Let's break down what is Wu and what is Sha, right? Let's talk about that. And then one thing that I would really like to dive into is something that I've seen a lot in Wusha in doing research and reading, is this code of Sha. So, well, first of all, like, what is Wusha? Let's break down like the two words. What is Wu and what is Sha?
So Wu is martial or fight. Basically, it's like fighting. Martial arts is really that part of it. So doesn't necessarily have to be like the main character, but there's definitely physical conflict, put it that way. And Sha, I think we were talking a little bit about earlier, is what is to do what is right. That's how I would define it. To do what you believe is the right thing to do. You don't necessarily have to be like orthodox to do very Sha things, because a lot of people like will get, kicked out of their sect or clan, but then they'll still go on to do very heroic things to help other people. Benevolence, I think, is definitely a key for a lot of Sha people, whether or not that involves, I guess, like what you think about evildoers, how you deal with them in the end. That's a different question. The big point is that you are there to help other people, like to help the weak and to defeat bullies and stuff like that. So that would be like the main point.
So the characters that are in like a Wusha novel, or like a web novel, a TV show or a movie, are they generally folks who exist outside of, say, like the bureaucracy?
Not always. Not always. Sometimes they are part of the government and bureaucracy, and then they will get called names by those who aren't, because there's like a level of disrespect that some of these non-governmental like Ulin people. So Ulin is like martial, is the same U, and Lin is like forest. It's like a general reference to the people in this martial world. That's like what.
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead.
It's like that's like since there's no like physical boundaries for these people, like that's why there's like jianghu, which is another way to say it, which is like rivers and lakes. It's just like this general obscure reference to this other world that doesn't have physical boundaries, or wulin. Like these
Yeah.
are the people in this kind of culture. They're like
Yeah.
training
Yeah.
and they fight.
These are concepts that we definitely touched on in our first wuxia episode, right?
Yeah.
Where we talked about like the contrast of jianghu versus miaotang, and therefore like jianghu is the historically it was used to invoke what exists outside of like the official imperial structure, which is like a miaotang is like the government. Miaotang is miao is like temple.
Yeah,
Tang is just like
it's like official place, like palace.
Yeah.
Kind of like court.
Yeah.
Kind of deal.
Yeah. So it's
But-
just like the court versus a system that exists outside of it.
Yeah,
And
right.
then and so like historically, like the term like xia and or xia ke, which is just like the person who like embodies this kind of like, so like if you were to say like I was googling this while we were talking just now, like a wandering vigilante is like one of the earlier uses of this term.
Right.
Or like something like an adventure,
Yeah.
knight errant. Like it depends on like in what context they are used, but like these are kind of, and then so like traditionally a lot of these stories are about people who are kind of like folk heroes kind of, and then they like go around and then they encounter problems, usually like in a locale, and then they do something to either resolve it or, well, usually it gets resolved for better or for worse.
Resolved
So-
in one way or another.
Right. Okay.
The issue ends. Yeah. So, and then like then there's more. Then I don't remember. Anyway, if you were to go back to that episode, it really talks about like the historical development of this as a
Yeah.
genre.
So
So-
would we say that like the Wulin is like the martial arts community, like the world of the martial
Yeah.
artists, and the Jianghu is like kind of what ties them all together?
Those are
Jianghu is
they're kind of interchangeable, aren't they?
Are they? 'Cause-
Kind
I
of?
think it depends on who's saying like
Yeah.
what the usage is. I think
Right.
Jianghu is definitely more. It's definitely broader. Like
Yeah,
you can
'cause-
refer to Jianghu as like
The 90s
More-
gangster movies in HK in Hong Kong, they'll talk about jianghu, and those are like
Yeah.
mobsters, and that's their jianghu.
So is that their
Yeah.
like their world? So like
Yeah.
Yes.
so like could you say that like I'm gonna D&D this up, and this might not be right, and this is actually a part of the conversation, but could you say like the Jianghu is the class of individual within the Wulin? So like the beggars, or like the outlaws, like they're
No.
separate communities and they're all
How I
together
would-
within the Wulin.
So how I would translate Jianghu is like the like politic. But
Okay.
like it has to do with politics. Like there's like, you know how there's a lot of terminology about like for example, like at work, there's like work politics, and then like in school there's like school politics, and then in like sports clubs there's sports club politics.
Right.
And I feel like Jianghu sometimes is used like that too. Like
Yeah.
this is the political burden and or like like tangle of relationships. I
okay.
feel like a lot of times when you see it in like movies, when they talk about like the jianghu, they are actually talking about that like social relationship aspect of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of like how we talked about like face and like guanxi and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. The Jianghu is kind of like the entanglements of the people who are within the Wulin.
So that is definitely one
That's one way
usage
to
of
say
it.
it, yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
and then the other usage is, of course, like what I
Mm-hmm.
said previously about like it being a contrast. So the term has a lot of different usages.
So Johnny, you mentioned it was like rivers and lakes.
That's the literal translation.
But why is that? Why why is that the case then? Why is that term used? I'm so curious because like if like the Wulian is like the martial forest and like Jianghu is like that rivers and lakes literally, is there a particular reason why?
Probably because people lived around there. I don't know.
Or I guess maybe
I
it
would say
forms
ask
a
you
full
this.
world.
I
Yeah,
would just like
I guess
ask you.
well, watch
you would
part
know.
two. Watch part two. Watch part two. We're here to kind of set a foundation. The other thing that we've
speaking of foundation though, so this is all great and like from an academic sense, I understand everything like that. But for me personally, when I learn these kind of concepts, I like to bring it into like my own experiences. So I'm very Western in my upbringing. So wuxia, the first time I like heard that term was like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Mhm.
But if I go backwards, so let's go backwards even more. Bruce Lee had a lot of films, and I always got the gut feel that he was very much influenced by the stories that were told in wuxia. And if you take a look at something like Fists of Fury, where he's kind of like the outsider who has come in, is trying to understand his place in the society, has learned there's a bunch of inequality, and has decided to punch his way for some equality.
Mhm.
And also for some justice. That had always felt like a very like wuxia like type of
Mhm.
storyline to me. Am I off, or like what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's very much a wuxia story. It's like usually it's like a group or like a certain people, they come in to a certain area and they see a bunch of injustices, and that's what the whole point of Sha is. Like they see something wrong and their
Right.
goal is to fix it. Usually they'll try to fix it, by talking or, convincing people, and that doesn't always happen. So you start doing fists and swords and fans and all sorts of cool stuff.
So
Yeah,
let's take this
'cause-
one step even. Sorry, I'm gonna keep
No,
going.
keep going. Go,
Yeah,
go, go.
keep going.
So we keep going. So we get to the westernization of like these ideas of martial arts films. I'm not gonna say wuxia films, but like martial arts films. So we get something like Karate Kid. Now, Karate Kid is a story about someone who is new to a society, a white boy who has come into like this white culture and doesn't fit in, and is the villain. But generally doesn't fit in, and it has felt like this tension here. And they find like a mentor and go through like basically building up their martial arts skill to punch their way to what they see as justice. Now, would you say that something like Karate Kid is a wuxia type of thing, or have we moved into an area where it's a little too gray and there's like more nuance to talk about? In your opinion,
There's a little bit more nuance in this, more on like a mechanical side.
Okay.
Because in my opinion, this is my personal opinion on this, because for me, some of the definitive mechanical points of wuxia, and this is a word that I don't like to use, is like the cultivation. I really don't like this translation. Is mechanically, these people train chi, inner energy, and they learn martial arts moves in terms of like forms and stuff, right? I think those get kind of worked in, whether or not it's specific or not. And I guess like Karate Kid does have some of it, but it's lacking that fantastical element of training like chi.
I think counterpoint.
But what about
Okay.
Shinxia?
Counterpoint.
What about Shinxia then? When it comes to like the fantasy sort of side of things,
I feel like a story is not a wuxia story if it does not have the jianghu in there. So if it doesn't have the people and the politics of like this society, this subculture, I don't know how.
but it does, because there's the Cobra Kai and then there's Miyagi. I think the one thing that makes, in my mind, that makes Karate Kid not a wuxia. I mean, there's two things. First of all, it's about Japanese martial arts.
Yeah.
That's the first one, right? We're gonna talk about that. The second one is like, Johnny, you mentioned like benevolence and righteousness. Like, Daniel LaRusso is very much the villain of Karate Kid, right? He like inserts himself into the lives of these people and taunts them, uses violence and all that. But he also wins in the end with an illegal move, which doesn't seem like a benevolent or righteous thing to do, right? Like if you rewatch, because I rewatched Karate Kid recently, and then I started reading all these analysis of Karate Kid and then the Cobra Kai show on Netflix, and I was like, oh yeah, Daniel's kind of the villain.
I feel like I don't know if like righteousness is always at the core of like more modern wuxia stories. I think it's very different from its its historical origin. So I don't think like you need a morally good protagonist for it to be a wuxia story.
No. Dear Cauldron totally had like the worst, like
Okay,
the least morally good character as the protagonist.
Okay, so the
and that was
protagonist,
a wuxia story.
so the protagonist doesn't have to embody that sort of sha that you talked about then.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
like on a visceral level, I just disagree with it being a wuxia story because in my mind, I still think of wuxia as being a very Chinese genre.
Right. It is very Chinese genre.
And Karate Kid is just it's just not Chinese in a lot of ways. Like, first of all, because you're learning karate, not like Chinese martial arts, and second of all, like the moral of the story, the tone, the the theme is like it's very individualistic. And like the way, I don't know, it's just like the way that people relate to each other. It's a very Western storytelling tradition that is in a lot of movies, right? Like most superhero movies are like that too. But I just feel like tonally, it doesn't feel Chinese. There are a lot of Chinese stories that are also like in the wuxia genre and that are also about this like dude who was like a loser and then like learns some cool thing and then becomes like the very best. But I feel like there's still something about like there's
something about Karate Kid that misses the wuxia thing, but it has elements in it. It has like, it's like if you're cooking something and you have like two or three of the 10 spices you need to make it.
Yeah. Like a spice is going to taste the same, but there's nuance in how you prepare it.
Yeah.
So
and I apologize for this like tangent because I picked Karate Kid because I knew it was going to be difficult to deconstruct, and it's not my intention to deconstruct it fully here.
Well,
but I
think you bringing that up is a great point, though, Steve, because it relates to what we're going to talk about down the line.
Exactly.
I think that like one of the things that came up when we put out some tweets about this was that like, are all martial arts movies wuxia movies?
It's a really good question.
And that's the question that I want to pose to to Johnny and Agatha. Are all martial arts movies wuxia movies? So, for instance, is Shang-Chi a wuxia movie, or is Ip Man, is that a wuxia movie, or is I'm just kind of go, or is like Enter the Dragon a wuxia movie, and then we'll go on the other end is like, well, what about is The Great Wall a wuxia movie? So like, do all martial arts or action movies that take place either in ancient China or in the near or current present, are those
Mulan a wuxia movie?
Or Mulan, yeah, or is Mulan a wuxia movie?
Haven't seen it, but I'm tempted to say no if I want to apply like strict definitions around it.
Well, there's no Jianghu, right, or Wulin in Mulan, right?
Yeah.
And then what about Ip Man? Like those movies, are they wuxia?
I think
movies?
Ip Man definitely is.
Because of so why do you think it's they're wuxia movies?
Because they solve problems by fighting.
And I guess because they've got the different schools, like they're always like, oh, my style and your style, Ip Man, Wing Chun.
And you're like solving the problem of like political conflict by like, but what if we just got a showdown? I mean, okay, I actually love the movies.
I do too. I love them.
I don't want to throw shade, but like to me, that feels very much like a wuxia story.
Okay, so that's definitely closer than like Karate Kid is.
So Mulan and Karate Kid, no. Yip Man, yes. Okay, what about Shang-Chi?
Haven't seen it.
Based on the trailers, perhaps then.
I don't know anything about this.
Like, so I look at Shang-Chi and I'm like, oh, okay, it's got some elements of wuxia that based on my understanding, right? It's got this whole separate world, which is like the Wulin. But then there's a part of Shang-Chi that I don't know actually fits within wuxia, and I think this definitely leans into the D&D conversation we're about to have, and it's that like he's got like mystical magic artifacts and there's dragons and monsters.
Ooh, okay. So if we're strictly talking about wuxia and separating it from xianxia and then separating it from xuanhuan, wuxia doesn't have dragons or like magic specifically in it. a lot of the people who they see when they see people like flying, that's part of the usage of like their internal energy, their chi that they've been training. And you can't keep that up forever. So back when like Crouching Tiger came out, people were like, well, why didn't they just fly back to get like the medicine? It's like, you can't go that fast forever, like on your own stamina. A horse is still going to be faster than you are. Like there's a limitation to your own personal stamina when you use this stuff and when you do those moves.
Okay, so what about Shinsha then?
Keep my favorite way to tell someone like how to tell what something is Shinsha is if the dude is flying on a sword. If someone flies on a sword,
Like standing on a sword, right?
like that is like the biggest trophy thing that like every Shinsha thing has. Is like, do they stand on a sword and fly?
Okay, so then what was the last one you mentioned?
Shenhuan is like even more like beyond
it's mythological.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
way
so
more
gods
mythological.
and stuff.
Kind of.
And spirits.
Yeah, spirits and gods. So like Shenhuan and Xinsha have more crossover. Than like wuxia and Xinsha.
I feel like Xinsha is like and Xuanhuan, the difference is more in like the kinds of stories that they tell.
Mm-hmm.
So like you don't differentiate them in terms of like how much magic is there because there's a lot of magic in both. But like Xinsha is a lot about getting good, getting to the top, or like
in terms of like personal relationships. Yeah, a lot of romances. Like the whole like series Sword and Fairy I've been playing, Xinjin Qixia Zuan. That's like the granddaddy of like, my opinion is the granddaddy of all Xinsha. And it's always about like every single game in there is about love and loss. You play that game, I promise you, one of those characters is gonna die.
Okay. Spoilers. So that's that's Xinsha.
Yeah.
So then in terms of scale, so Agatha, you mentioned stories. Well, what was the other genre again?
Xuanhuan.
So then what would you characterize the story in that genre then, as opposed to?
I'm going to defer to you, Johnny, because I don't think
Did you play Sword of Legends? You played a little bit of Sword of Legends 3, right?
Yeah, I mean, I played the MMO, and you can like fly on a sword.
Yeah. Right. So that's got that Xinsha, but like Sword of Legends is actually more Xuanhuan than Xinsha. It has way more fantastical, my opinion on it, because at least in Sword of Legends 3, it goes completely bananas and people are like turning into mystical beasts and stuff like that. And
oh, okay, cool. Yeah,
it's just way above and beyond.
It's kind of like the scale. It's like the scale of the fantastical and kind of the focus. Then.
That's what I would say. Like kind of like a rough guide for me would be like Wuxia's kind of like the lower magic tier, and like Xinsha's someone like the normal D&D stuff. And then when you get to like deities and demigods is when you're like in this Xuanhuan territory where people are just like carving out mountains because they can.
Yeah, because they're so
angry.
powerful.
Because their partner cheated on them. Oh wait, that's Xinsha.
Yeah. Okay. So then that would make Shang-Chi a Xinsha movie then, based on the trailers.
Probably because they have a lot more mystical elements in there from what I see. Yeah.
Okay.
Now I'm really excited to watch it. I didn't know anything about this.
Yeah,
dude, I just want to watch Tony Leung on the big screen again.
Me too.
Tony Leung.
I think a lot of Asian people are mostly like, I want to watch this movie for the legend Tony Leung. Like me, he looks. Oh, that guy's such a good actor. Oh my God. But Agatha, it's literally about this guy who is trained to be a killer, and he abandons his like family and clan and organization to live a modest life in San Francisco. And then his life comes back to get him, and then he's like,
this is a Marvel film?
Yeah, it's a Marvel film.
Marvel film.
It's based on
that's why.
It's based on a really some really problematic old source material where they villainize. It's got a lot of yellow peril. So I'm interested to see what they kind of lean into. They I think like elements are like seem to be wuxia, and then elements tend to be xinsha in kind of like what they're showing. But that's kind of I'm interested to watch it, and especially after this episode. But why? So now we've kind of established like there is like scale to these genres in terms of the character themes, the magic portrayed, but kind of core to all of this is a lot of like martial arts. We've talked about alignment in D&D has always been a really difficult thing to address. But one thing they kind of do in wuxia, I've noticed, is they have the distinction between the orthodox and the unorthodox. instead of the good and bad or the good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And like I kind of want to dive into that real quick because that really affects how you would do wuxia and D&D.
Mm-hmm.
So orthodox and unorthodox, would you say that, I mean, how would you describe that to somebody who has never done that before or encountered like sects and things like that?
My sense on it in general is how they gain power. So in Wuxia, like most of the characters train their internal energy, then they learn martial arts forms, and the combination of the two is how they normally fight. Some characters or some schools have ways to gain power more quickly than others through not necessarily like just sitting there and like meditating or like gathering your energy like you normally would, because the way they would train would just be a lot of sitting and meditating and gathering energy. Some of these other methods may involve like stealing someone else's chi and making it your own. Like that's really unorthodox. But is it evil? I don't know. If someone's coming to kill you and that's how you do it. And it became like a very big sticking point in Demigods and Seven Devils, Tianlong Babu, where two schools have similar ways of acquiring this power or of this like stealing someone else's powers. But one person did it one way, one school does it one way, another person was like doing it another way. And the protagonist learned one of the other ways and then got mistaken for one of the antagonist students. And they're like, he's the evil person. And you know, that was a huge
Does that what happened? Oh wow. It's been so long since I've read it.
So could you say that like I feel like people, I'm going to get roasted.
Unorthodox methods generally are riskier to the user.
Right. They're shortcuts.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think this is rooted in like sort of traditional Chinese values of hard work?
That's possible.
One thing I kind of see, like I'm thinking about D&D, I'm like, oh, unorthodox. It's like when you look at like, oh, wizards, they study magic in books, and then warlocks, they make a pact to get magic power. Is that kind of like the distinction? I'm not saying wizards are orthodox and warlocks are unorthodox, but as a point of comparison for those who are familiar.
I think that's pretty accurate, actually.
Yeah.
I would say. And I think the interesting thing is also that even though like orthodox and unorthodox, it sounds like a much more neutral set of terminology in English, but I think originally in Chinese, it's like it's pretty. There are different things that you associate with them.
Yeah.
Like, so for like Orthodox, you associate like righteousness and like being morally good in general and like following the straight and narrow. Whereas like unorthodox is supposed to be like you are morally either ambiguous or bankrupt. And like sometimes those things and like these are the implications, which is why like good and bad or good and evil is kind of an accurate way of translating them as well. But the thing is, like, and the reason why there is nuance is because in the stories themselves, they're exploring that, like sects that are sects that are supposed to be orthodox, often like do things that are not righteous, or like, you know, like, and then like those who are from unorthodox sects can also be like good people and like be the only one like helping whoever is in need out when everyone else like turned away. So it's like it's the genre itself is playing with these labels, but the labels themselves you can say are like good and evil. But if we're talking about like alignment in D&D, then like alignment implies that this person is like that through and through, right? So I guess that's where the biggest difference is for me.
You can be a good character and learn unorthodox moves. You can be an evil character and learn orthodox moves. Like alignment and more, like this they don't line up.
So it's more like, so you could say like in D&D, it's like we have orthodox magical spells and unorthodox magical spells.
Yeah.
And not like an independent, separate of the character.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay.
what I mean, so far in this conversation, what I'm hearing is a lot of the themes and stories and things we've touched, elements we've touched on for stories. These are things that I could incorporate in my D&D game, like wholesale. Like it would be mostly me as the designer and the DM, and a lot of my players to like engage with my stories and whatnot. But insofar, everything you've described to me, D&D supports, in that it doesn't not support it. Weird sentence, but like hopefully you can kind of get my meaning here. But I know that the D&D game has actually wuxia written in it. And I've always like I went back and I read it several times, and it's always kind of left like a strange kind of discomfort with me. It's one that I could never really vocalize. I was wondering if we could maybe like take a look at that text.
Yeah, why don't we dive into it? So for those who are watching or listening, if you have a Dungeon Master's guide in front of you, turn to page 41 on the Dungeon Master's guide. So there's a section.
Pause the stream. Go grab it.
Pause the stream.
It suddenly feels like a class. I love it.
I'm back. I'm teaching again. Okay, everyone, we're going to turn to page 41. We're going to talk a little bit about wuxia.
Hands on the front. It's like sit down, just like slapping like paper on the desk.
It's the sound of my Dungeon Master's guide. Now, one thing to notice is that wuxia in the Dungeon Master's guide is in a section called Flavors of Fantasy. Okay. Now, in this it says Dungeons and Dragons is a fantasy game, but that broad category encompasses a lot of variety. Many different flavors of fantasy exist in fiction and film. Do you want a horrific campaign inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft or Clark Ashton Smith? Or do you envision a world of muscled barbarians and nimble thieves along the lines of the classic Sword and Sorcery books by Robert E. Howard and Fritz Leiber? Your choice can have an impact on the flavor of your campaign. And they have like a whole bunch of different ones. They've got like heroic fantasy, sword and sorcery, epic fantasy, mythic fantasy, dark fantasy. I don't know why intrigue is a flavor of fantasy, because you can have intrigue in literally everything. Mystery, same thing. The swashbuckling, war, you can have war in literally everything. And then they have wuxia. And when I approached you, Johnny, and I was like, okay, we're going to talk about wuxia in 5e, your response was something along the lines of, wait, is there wuxia in D&D, like officially?
Yeah.
And I was like,
huh?
Here, let me send you a screenshot. And I sent it to you. And I was like, okay, I'll wait a little bit for Johnny to respond. And you were like, what the fuck did you just send me?
I was like, my eyes, what did I just read?
And I think it's valuable to, kind of go over what is provided in Flavors of Fantasy before diving into this. So, in True Asians Represent Fashion,
if possible, I would like to also couch this in that when I read this, if I was reading it from a perspective of like, I'd only grown up watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and maybe I'd heard about Bruce Lee or something like that, this text parses like kind of okay. Like it makes sense syntactically. Like it is text you can read and understand.
Yeah.
You know what? I actually wrote this when I was a TA. I wrote this on a paper that got a really bad score, but was bad grade, but was well written. And I wrote, this essay effectively uses paragraphs.
Ooh.
And that's what this does.
It stings. Yeah.
Right?
But yes, let's continue.
Let's start. So I'm going to start by reading. This is the first time we've read like a physical book live. And feel free to stop me whenever. When a sensei disappears mysteriously, her young students must take her place.
No, let's stop already. Let's
stop already.
Let me finish the sentence. Must take her place. When a sensei disappears mysteriously, her young students must take her place and hunt down the oni terrorizing their village. Okay, let's talk about that. First of all, let's just say this. Japanese.
All right. First off, why sensei and oni? Like, these are Japanese words and concepts. Wuxia is specifically a Chinese thing.
Very specifically a Chinese thing.
Yeah, very specifically a Chinese thing. That's just wrong.
And even if it was like a Chinese creature or monster, based on what we've talked about, that's still not wuxia, right?
Yeah. Like it would be more accurate to say when a shifu disappears mysteriously, or shifu disappears mysteriously, her young students must take her place and hunt down the bandits terrorizing her village.
Yeah, and that boom,
something like
wuxia.
that,
That's wuxia
right?
there.
Then you have something more like it.
Okay,
But it's like,
that's sentence one. We got to get through this.
mm-hmm.
We don't have 40 episodes.
This is an Asian's read.
As Asians read 5e D&D all over again. Accomplished heroes, masters of their respective martial arts, return home to free their village from an evil hobgoblin warlord. I think like the first part of it is like, yeah, that's wuxia.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the hobgoblin part, like I could see why they put that in there because it's to relate it to D&D. I get that part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also,
I mean,
hobgoblins have a strange coding.
I
in
know.
Dungeons and
Yeah,
Dragons.
there's
Like
also like
We don't need to get into that
We don't need to
get into
today,
that.
but
Yeah.
I do want to call out that hobgoblins have historically had a
Yeah.
very strange coding when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons.
Just like remove hobgoblin and just say an evil warlord, and you're
Yeah.
good.
yeah.
Just say it's an evil warlord, and you're good. You don't need that.
Yep. Then the last sentence of the first paragraph says, the Rakshasa master of a nearby monastery performs rituals to raise troubled ghosts from their rest. Okay, well, first of all, we talked about spirits being
Yep.
not in wuxia, but
Yep,
also like
yep.
this is like a really interesting thing that I was keen on bringing up with the three of you. Rakshasas are like, they're in many editions of D&D, but they're like a supernatural entity from like Hinduism and Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does
Correct.
religion figure into wuxia?
A whole lot. Glad you asked. Shaolin Temple. There's always a saying in these like wuxia things, like all martial arts comes from Shaolin Shaolin Temple, which is a Buddhist organization.
Yep.
So Chinese Buddhism, if you historically speaking, if you look it up, there's this guy named Damo, like I don't even know what his English name is, but he actually did do a lot of martial arts. But the way he did it was a way to strengthen the body and to help people like be healthy. So all of his exercise and stuff were for self-defense and for, health, because these monks, what they would do is they would go and ask for charity. And so if you have money, you got money from charity, someone wants to rob you, you can't let someone rob you. So it's part of that. And the other side, Wudang, so the famous or infamous Wu-Tang Clan, like took their name from there. They are Taoists. They're specifically Taoists. So they follow Taoism, and a lot of those things are not only in wuxia but also in xianxia, like the talismans that they draw and all that. That's a very Taoist thing that they do.
Yeah.
My particular take on not necessarily Shaolin, but Buddhism and the physicality of being a ghost in the shell is very much of the extent and the limits of what spirit, soul, and body can have. And like for me personally, I've talked about this a lot about my working out and like my fitness and whatnot, but there is a very deep spiritual connection that I get out of it. And that has always brought me closer to Buddhist teachings and other teachings that I've had from the Eastern side of my heritage. So I can relate very much to the spirituality and the physicality, the martialness of these ideas.
So then my question is, Rakshasa technically then it's not it's not out of place in terms of like the use of religion and things like that, but it's out of place then in terms of what you would see in a wuxia story.
Like
Yes.
a cat person,
fighting basically like a legendary sort of demonic supernatural creature.
Yeah,
would not be a wuxia thing.
Yeah, but fighting someone from like a specific religion would be fine. Like there's a very famous protagonist that's like a lama from Tibetan areas, I think.
Right. So then you could say that if you were to include a Rakshasa, it could be instead perhaps it's like the heroes are actually fighting against perhaps a group of bandits or an evil martial arts sect or a cult, right? Because you see cults a lot in wuxia who are worshiping a Rakshasa and trying to raise the dead through their martial arts.
They wouldn't try to raise the dead.
Or do you think they would use the Rakshasa's knowledge and maybe gain power that way? Killing old masters, stealing techniques.
I think the sentence itself is just wrong.
It's just weird.
Because if they're troubled spirits, then why are they
Yeah.
resting?
Why?
Like,
yeah.
it's just wrong. It's,
Yeah,
it's an
true.
incorrect sentence.
Yeah.
That's true.
Like, that's,
Like
and I would posit that's why it's causing so much struggle. It's not so much the cultural signifier of the Rakshasa, but it's actually the fact that it has taken two ideas and not used them correctly when it comes to spirits.
And you could say like cross-cultural indicators, because I don't want to say like Rakshasa are elements of religions that are practiced around the world, but have obviously roots in South Asia.
I think it's more accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going. But you're right. And then if we were talking about like ghosts in China, we could do like a whole episode on ghosts in China and all the different Chinese ghosts. Hey,
Ghost month.
do you want to do Halloween episode, Agatha?
But we should
we
have
should-
done it in July.
That's true.
We should do a Southeast Asian episode and just talk about how fucking haunted that area of the world is. It's
there's
so fucking haunted.
much fucking
Anyways, sorry.
scary
Yeah,
shit.
I get scared. I literally get scared. Like, please don't tell me about any haunted places when I go. Please don't.
Special guest Johnny.
Go watch Tresse. Let's continue.
Go watch Tressa. Yeah. Anyways, a campaign that draws on elements of Asian martial arts movies is a perfect match for D&D. And this was why I asked that question. Are all martial arts movies wuxia movies? They are not. Players can define the appearance of their characters and gear however they like for the campaign, and spells need only minor flavor changes so they better reflect such a setting. For example, when the characters use spells or special abilities that teleport them short distances, they actually make high-flying acrobatic leaps. Okay, let's talk about this.
So
This is again, I can see why they wrote this, because in D&D, chi is magic. But we talked about that and how it's not. So I see why they did it. It's just flat wrong.
Yeah.
So I will say that when I read this, I can read it one of two ways. One way is pretty like generous, where I'm like, oh, you can change the appearance of your characters. They can wear different clothing. The second way I read it is that they're saying that if you're going to play a wuxia game, play Asian characters, put on Asian skin. That's my most harmful read of that text. And I think both are valid. But you know, it takes into account what trauma the reader has had in the past and what other context is given here. And when I say that that's my reading, you know, I see wuxia, which is not a Western or English word. I see we're using Japanese words explicitly, and they're like, change the appearance of your character. And it really touches me in a way where I'm like, my appearance has affected me in my life a lot. So I would have, if I was a sensitive reader, I would have been more specific and said, like, you can choose the appearance of your clothing or what your armor looks like. But leaving it as appearance is not okay with me in this context.
Yeah, it's a tough point, because like they're specifically talking about like Asian media and stuff like that. And in another section in the Dungeon Master's Guide, they've actually specifically talked about how like honor is a thing that suits Asian settings. They said that explicitly in this book. I'll find it. But I think the thing here is that like they're basically saying that wuxia is an aesthetic, which it is not. And I think that's kind of what you're leaning in on, Steve. You're like, oh, just Asian air quotes is an aesthetic, which it is not. But they take it a step further and say this entire literary genre is just an aesthetic. So, you know, if your magic lets you teleport, just say you're leaping from tree to tree very slowly, like in Crouching Tiger. And they go even further, and they say, like, ability checks to climb don't involve careful searching for holds, but let characters bounce up walls or from tree to tree. Warriors stun their opponents by striking pressure points. Flavorful descriptions of actions in the game don't change the nuts and bolts of the rules, but they make all the difference in the feel of a campaign, which, again, further like reinforces my point and Steve's point of like wuxia is not an aesthetic. Like there is a lot of nuance to it, and the stories that are told and the kinds of characters that the players literally play. Right?
Yeah, I agree. This whole thing is just, it's all sorts of wrong.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about mechanical support for playing out a genre, but I feel like that is the same thought that I always have when it comes to like, what if we use D&D to play something that is not actually supplied in its core mechanics? So
Yeah, these are
I don't know
conversations
if-
that you and I have had, Agatha, over the new Dungeons and Asians show that we'll do in the future.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and you know, we've kind of gone back and forth. It's like I think we agree with each other's points.
Yeah.
On one end, it's like, yeah, D&D is not designed to do wuxia and wuxia stories
Straight
with
up
like
not.
out of the box. It is not. But at the same time, D&D is very much the biggest and most common entry point to the TTRPG genre for folks.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like that's why I would want to do our wuxia show in D&D
Yeah.
to show people. But at the same time, it's a lot of work. It's why I wrote wuxia. Actually, I wrote a wuxia story for Candlekeep Mysteries,
Yep.
right? To show that you can do it, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of nuance. And they kind of dive into it, and I think this is I think it's worth reading the next paragraph because I know you're going to have things to say about it when it comes to mechanics, Agatha. Because in the next paragraph, they say, similarly, a class doesn't need new rules to reflect a cultural influence. A new name could do the trick. And I think
That's just straight up fucking wrong.
I think it's straight up wrong.
sorry. That came. I don't know where that came from.
No, I agree because it's like I mean, let's just talk about it because they say a traditional Chinese wuxia hero might be a paladin who has a sword called the Oath of Vengeance, while a samurai, a Japanese samurai, might be a paladin with a particular oath of devotion, bushido, that includes fealty to a lord, daimyo, among its tenets. Like, this isn't like the Akira Kurosawa section, like of this book, right? And then a ninja is a monk who pursues the way of shadow. Whether called a wujen, a sukai, or a swami, a wizard, sorcerer, or warlock character works just fine in a game inspired by medieval Asian cultures.
Okay. So I want to hear everyone else's thoughts first before I like go into the mechanics.
I kind of just want to listen to
basically.
you, Agatha.
I was gonna say, Agatha, I actually am so curious to hear your thoughts because I have the privilege of seeing you. I had the privilege and also like the the pain of seeing you struggle through your thoughts, and I'm so curious to hear your expression of your feelings of this. But I'm happy to share mine if that gives you some space and time to help form
No,
it up.
I'm down. I'm down. Okay, so
Fuck yeah.
So the thing is, well, I was looking at the previous paragraph where it's just talking about like the sentence when characters use spells or special abilities that teleport them short distances, they actually make high flying acrobatic leaps. Okay, so that is using magic to do something that's physical. And I feel like that inherently is already going against the idea of what a martial artist is. So then it's like and classes in D&D are so much about like the classes define the character, right? Or like so like a warrior means that you are strong physically, and of course you can like multi-class and mix things up, and there are a lot of like hybrid classes in terms of like form and function and like narrative flavor, but here it's explicitly saying that you use one thing that is very like it's magic, and then you use it to in the application is in something that is supposed to be purely physical. So there is already, and then following that is the sentence, ability checks to climb don't involve careful searching for holes, but let characters bounce up walls or from tree to tree. So that is one where it's mechanically it's the physical side, right? Like you then you're implying that everyone is already physically agile. So then it's like I was reading and I was like, okay, so then as a DM, like how in what situations would I tell them to like make a magic check, and in what situation am I supposed to say like, oh, it's just in the genre, so you don't need any checks when you're like bouncing from tree to tree or like running up walls. And so there was that, and then now we're going into this like the Chinese wuxia hero might be a paladin, and so a paladin is it's rooted in
The Templar Knight.
Christian
Mhm.
his Western historic like history, right? It's like when you think of a paladin, yeah, you think of a Templar knight, and it's like that's written into the story.
Mhm.
I mean, sorry, that's written into the class where it's like you believe in a god, and that
Your
like
God
gives
That
you
gives you your
supplies you with
power. Yeah.
power, but that would fall into the unorthodox. In you're not training for it. It's given to you,
interesting.
right?
That's very interesting.
But that's like that is completely separate of the point you're making, where the paladin is very much coded as European.
Yes.
Mhm.
And so like the
Yes.
mechanics reflect that. And but then here I just feel like this whole section is like saying it's like I it's saying that you can play this, and I feel like it's just, to me it feels very lazy because it's saying like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, you can just kind of like do some kind of aesthetics thing, and then now our game is like suitable for playing in this genre. But no, it's not. Like none of the mechanics support it, and
Mhm.
in the instructions itself written in this text that people bought with their money, it it's contradicting each other and being very unclear. And I feel like that just goes against what like a game book should do, more than like all of this like, whoa, we don't know the difference between Japan and China in terms of these terminologies. More than that, it's just like I feel like this piece of text is not, it's not, it should not be like an official game text because it's not actually giving any kind of like support. Like if I was running this game, I'm like, it's basically just saying like just homebrew it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I already know that I can homebrew things. Like
Yeah.
but you're giving me this section on it, and you're giving me nothing to like
Mhm.
support my homebrewing. There are no like any kind of like extra rules about like, there's no like guidance on like
Yeah.
what, like how do I import like for example, like how do I import like the kind of like physical aspect of martial arts
Mhm.
into like a D&D game. Like it doesn't, it just has literally no scaffolding for
Mhm.
that. And that's my thoughts about this text and about like mechanics needing to support the genre. I think at the very least they should have given just like a list of guidances on like even on the mechanics, or
Yeah.
and then or like a chart.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of these like trad games like charts. I love charts. I think this could have used a chart.
Could use a couple of charts.
Could use a couple.
It
It's got a chart, and we're gonna talk about that chart.
Oh
But
no, it does have
Oh,
a
the
chart,
it does
weapon
have
names.
a weapon
Oh.
name chart. We're gonna talk about that, Agatha. Okay, so
which is again
Your
aesthetic.
expression.
okay, so here's one thing that I think you've really brought up, right? Wuxia does not belong in the flavors of fantasy section of the book. It simply does not belong here because it is not a flavor of fantasy, because wuxia itself is also not really fantasy. I mean,
It's a whole different genre.
It's a whole different genre, and that's where they get this completely wrong. I think one thing here that's worth noting is that like they do this blending of Asian cultures, and they're like, yeah, sensei, and this is why I wanted to talk about Karate Kid, because right here they blend the Japanese and Chinese stuff. And I think it's like super reductive to basically, I mean, this is a pattern that D&D has shown in that they blend Asian cultures into one thing, right? It's like the Asian cultures are basically treated like the Cobb salad of like in D&D. They just like throw a bunch of shit in there and hope it tastes good. I think that like, Paladin is like fundamentally cannot be used in wuxia, right?
I agree.
Fundamentally,
So,
from like a mechanical perspective and just how it's designed, the name, everything like that. I do want to talk about how you could do wuxia, and a suggestion that I would make based on the conversation that we've had so far. If you were playing, or if you would like to do wuxia obviously, I think we want to start with there's a lot of work involved, right? Not only with the kind of themes that you actually discuss and the things that are sort of that your characters encounter in the world. For one, I want to talk about the kinds of characters that you might make if you were doing a wuxia story. So for me, I would say, okay, you're not going to use any magic. You're not going to use the sorcerer, the warlock, the wizard. You're not going to touch those. The paladin, the cleric are so deeply coded as European, though you could reskin some of the things that the cleric does and call them like an herbalist. And then you could kind of go into the whole like doctor elements of wuxia, because Chinese story and Chinese story, like literature in general, has a lot of famous doctors, like in like Romance of the Three Kingdoms. A lot of people know that, right? So you could do that, and I would reskin the cleric. The classes that I would actually lean into would be things like the fighter, the rogue, and in some cases, the bard.
I have a couple of things to say about the bard and some magic.
Let's talk about it.
So there is one instance where mage hand was actually used in demigods and semi-devils, but it's a very high level like martial arts move that one of the protagonists uses as an intimidation to show that like, I can do this, don't mess with me. And it comes up where he's like standing there and he doesn't have a weapon, and there's like a dao, like a Chinese broadsword on the floor, and he like brings it to him, like basically breaking the laws of physics, and brings it to him, and everyone's like, oh my god, because to do that you need like a high level of chi. Everyone's like, oh okay, like do we really want to pick on this guy? Like not really. So like I would say for things like mage head, you would like need to be like very high level to be able to do some of like just like the level 0 spells. For music, there's actually a lot of things where a lot of writings and stories where people can use music to help calm someone down if they are like in inner turmoil, like if they've like suffered internal injuries and they're trying to like heal themselves, like they have to listen to something very calming or anything. Or you can also use it to like mess up someone where they're fighting and it makes their chi go awry, and then you know that also can do damage. So there's like a lot of like nuanced stuff that you can do with the bard.
Another reason why I picked the bard is because the bard gets to pick a college, which would be your sect. Which I think would be really interesting. I think the rogue obviously features really well with a lot of the stuff that like Jin Yong wrote with like beggars and like the beggar sect. Clan. Yeah, right. And I think that's the rogues right there, but also bards. Fighters, I think, have mechanical elements to them that can be kind of suited to wuxia, like action surge could represent you moving further, right? But it's not magical, right? Or things like second wind, where you can heal, I think are also non-magical. They're framed as non-magical, but more as like a dramatic thing. Like you get up and you're like, no, I'm still in this fight. Roll a d10.
And some of the like champion dice things too, like could be more representative, like tapping into that chi that they have, you know, they've trained for.
Yeah.
Things like that.
And like I wouldn't even honestly, like you could say, do like level. I mean, honestly, if I were to do a wuxia character, I would start all of the players at a higher level, but they've multi-classed. So they have like a level in monk where they get the martial arts ability. Again, this is to play off of what's already in D&D. They've got the martial arts ability from a level 1 monk. And then maybe they're going to go into either fighter, or they're going to go into rogue, or they're going to go into like bard. But at the root, everyone has a first level in monk, right? And then you can level up, you know, there's chi and key points and all that. But I think if you were to do D&D, multi-classing would be essential to hit a lot of the sort of visual and narrative beats of wuxia. And multi-classing itself would also limit the extreme power gain you would get if you were just playing like a bard and you would get all of this magic, right? And then magic and low-level magic, like maybe a first-level bard or things like that, would then come in at a higher level in your story, because you would get these like really wild powers. But again, this is a lot of work to basically be like, okay, everyone's going to be a level 1 monk, and then you can get 1 level in one other class, but then you can't pick anything magical. Right?
Yeah.
So
It's a lot of work.
I go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I love Dungeons and Dragons, but I hate work. So although everything you've said really resonates with me, I will never do this because I am too fucking lazy to do this. But naturally, as we've had these conversations, I've realized that I have done what many other people I think have done successfully, where it's when you understand wuxia and like where some of these elements come from and the stories that were told, and these stories are told to you time and time again in different ways, you have this flexibility where you can just take certain elements based on the narrative you're trying to push and trying to build with your players, because we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs, and actually incorporate those without changing too many mechanics. You can never get a full wuxia game out of Dungeons and Dragons for the exact reasons you said, and I 100% aligned with that. But I think you still can take some elements and actually pull those in while keeping within the framework of Dungeons and Dragons, knowing that you're going to hit restrictions and you have to just play within those.
Honestly, I would just say, if I would have just said, just do Shinsha in D&D.
Yeah.
Because that would be way easier.
So it's funny because what I was going to say was that in my games, there are like some wuxia storylines that like do take place. They came about semi-organically, but I also understand that as I grew up and watched these dramas where I could not understand anything they were saying because I don't speak Chinese, I don't speak anything, and the subtitles were in Vietnamese, and I couldn't read that either. But I just sat there, just like absorbing in this drama that was happening. Like, I'm lucky enough that I could read their faces and whatnot and like absorb that information. But that has given me the idea of like these types of dramas that happen. It's like, oh, this person is dressed a certain way, and look how they talk to this person who's dressed completely differently. And that is like ingrained in me. And that manifests in my Dungeons and Dragons games, where I do tell stories about how we have this someone who is has power. They are put in a position where their power is challenged per se, and then we talk about how that power is shifted, or maybe it doesn't shift, and things like that. And although I'm using very vague terms here, to me, these are resonant of the stories that I absorbed as someone who could not understand the language nor understand the writing.
Yeah, my home game started off as like a sort of like a pseudo wuxia story, and is now transforming into a shinsha story. My players don't know that yet, but it's going to become a shinsha story. I actually wrote out a very comprehensive breakdown of like the government structure and then the wulin, and I've kind of like I've got all these different sects that I've written out. But one thing that's interesting is like I was doing Ghosts of Saltmarsh is kind of like a starting adventure, because I thought it was really interesting in that, you know, the magical mystery of Saltmarsh is actually just bandits and outlaws fucking with people to try to scare them away. And I was like, oh, this is like a really cool thing to do. And they were all low level. But now that they're getting more powerful and they're encountering things that are more mythical, this is very much not a wuxia story anymore, and now a shinsha story. And there's nothing wrong with it not being wuxia. I think the point we're trying to make here is that D&D is not good at doing wuxia, but with some adjustments, you could do shinsha pretty easily. One thing that I think could be a really interesting change to D&D would be to actually, instead of doing it as a flavor of fantasy, you actually have a section on different backgrounds. So, you know, in D&D you pick a background. Then in this case, you could actually pick backgrounds that are wuxia specific. So, you know, like vagabond, or, you know, like a beggar, right? But you know, in D&D, there's already
Yeah.
urchin and all that,
Yeah.
right? But you could pick like ones that are specifically wuxia with wuxia specific features. So if you pick like beggar, well, you have access to like this information network and stuff like that. Or if you were like merchant, right? You have access to, you know, mercantile like information and funds and interesting stuff, which I think would be a great way to handle a lot of the Chinese themes that one might want to introduce to D&D. But our time is limited, so I want us to continue with the next section, and then the table. And it's wuxia weapon name. And then it goes, having players refer to a tetsubo or a katana rather than a great club or a longsword can enhance the flavor of a wuxia campaign. This is you crying, Agatha, just like...
Yeah. Think of those like noodle tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It literally opens up with the wuxia weapon name section the same way it opens up with the wuxia section with, hey, let's talk about Japanese stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like when a sensei disappears mysteriously and an oni
Please
terrorizes a village, the wuxia heroes pull out their katanas. Like, that's basically what they just said here.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
It's like,
But yeah, they basically use. They use recognizable Japanese elements when it's convenient, when they cannot articulate something that is Chinese, because they're like, oh, nobody's gonna know what a Dao is or a Jian is, and nobody's gonna be able to tell the difference. And then they say the wuxia weapon names table lists alternative names for common weapons from the player's handbook and identifies their real-world cultural origins. An alternative name changes none of the weapon's properties as they are described in the player's handbook, which I think is a bad thing. So then they have a table. So they're like, okay, wuxia weapon names. And here's the part that like bothers me, because it's like, it shouldn't be, they have two columns, weapon and then other names, culture. But here's the thing, it should be weapon, Chinese name. That should be it.
Yep.
Except what they do is they list Chinese and Japanese weapons. And so they're like if you think about like iconic wuxia weapons, you think of swords, right? Like Dao and like Jian are like iconic Chinese swords, and they're pretty emblematic of Chinese material culture. The Jian is very, very Chinese, and there isn't really anything like it in other cultures. The Dao itself is very different from the katana, right? And the Dao is also very different from, say, the tawar or the scimitar or the shamshir in West and South Asia. But here they're like, okay, so the flail, nunchaku, Japan. Okay.
They even get some of these wrong.
Then they say the glaive, because you and I were talking about this, the glaive, and they call it a guandao. And then they also say it's a bisento or a naginata in Japan. I want to talk about the guandao specifically.
Yeah.
Because the guandao is almost like a weapon of its own. And in Chinese and in traditional, like in Chinese history, pole arms, there were so many different pole arms in ancient China, like dagger axes. You don't see that anywhere else. Like a dagger axe is so cool. Like, why wouldn't you put that here under pole arms, right? But the guandao is a weird choice for me because it's so iconic of Guan Yu. And it's also iconic of the of imperial China and the Chinese military, and not. And I mean, if you look at historical Chinese like literature and art, the guandao is wielded by the military. Although in martial arts movies, you see characters use the guandao, but I don't know. It's a weird point for me.
The thing is, for me, like, you have this like, if you looked at a picture of like Guan Yu holding this, you might think like, oh yeah, that's a glaive. but that's if you like just glanced at it and like looked away. And that's really upsetting for me because that is a vector of cultural appropriation. It is a way to perpetuate harm where you can just take cultural signifiers, things with like a lot of history, and just paint it on to an experience that's not related to it at all. You divorce it from all the history, all the legends, all the myths, and you just say, "Oh, it's equivalent to this thing that my readers might understand." And one, very disrespectful to the people who are from that culture. Two, incredibly disrespectful to your readers. Your readers do have the ability, believe it or not, to understand that other cultures exist and that the stuff that they have and things that they use as cultural signifiers can exist outside of your Western frame. So stuff like this, just like,
they do get one,
it feels bad.
Yeah, they did get one right. Like the great sword, Changdao is pretty close to like a great sword. Same with, I guess, a Nodachi. But at the same time,
I want to say they got so many of them wrong though.
But they did get so many of them wrong. But here's where I think this table just didn't need to be here, and what they could have done was replace it with, here are Chinese weapons, and they could have just statted out Chinese weapons, and it would have been way more helpful. So yeah, I don't know. I got some issues with that.
Yeah, they should have just given you a table with,
Yeah, they should have just given us a table. When we go look at like, I look at this table and like, the long sword is a particularly difficult one to kind of talk about because in China there are like tons of different kinds of swords. There's the Jian and then there's the Dao are the two like big ones. But they could both be a D&D longsword in a sense. Yeah, it's kind of, this is just lazy, but it kind of leans into the whole idea that like being Asian is an aesthetic. And simple as that, right? I don't know. It's
what heavy shit.
It's heavy shit, right?
One thing I'd like to do to kind of help bring us to maybe like more of a connecting, maybe not necessarily happy note, but like something that I think will help build connections, is that I started this podcast, saying that wuxia is always something a bit on my periphery. And I will actually posit that for most people that grew up in the West, Asian or not, wuxia has also been on the periphery. And these concepts and stuff have really, really, really resonated with me. And the idea of connecting and like naming certain things I grew up with as wuxia elements would be really, really helpful. I wonder if we could end today's stream just talking about maybe Western media, where there are certain elements where you'd say that's kind of like wuxia. Like if you were starting with wuxia and you're looking to replicate more of like a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon thing, here's something that you might have experienced in Western society that actually is more of an interesting leverage point.
So you're
it's
saying
possible the answer is there is no such thing, and I'm fine with that.
I would honestly counter that, Steve, by saying, because what you basically suggested is telling people to look at Western things and not Asian things for an Asian genre. And
You're
I would
right.
just say that's problematic. I would just,
Fair.
but I do have an answer. One that was actually brought up in the chat by Eisen, and it's John Wick. And the John Wick series has like wuxia elements, because it's got a wulin, it's got that whole jianghu, it's got these sort of codes of conduct that all of the characters abide to. They operate these sort of liminal spaces in society where their world exists in the same, but is kind of separate. And the character of John Wick is nuanced and very skilled at what he does in a way that almost seems supernatural, but it's just because he's so good, which is very much a wuxia thing. It's just that he doesn't have chi, but also Keanu Reeves is part Chinese. So I get throw that out there. Also, happy birthday, Keanu. It was his birthday 2 days ago.
Yeah, happy birthday, Keanu.
Very true, very true.
Wait, actually?
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, so the
Honestly, here's what I want to put this out into the universe. Dream guest on Asians Represent would be Keanu Reeves.
100%.
Keanu Reeves DM a one shot or playing a one shot.
The whole episode would me just going, ah! Like, I just like it would just I just wouldn't be able to contain myself.
Keanu Reeves, Simu Liu.
Yeah. Here's my. We should do a whole episode on this, but like for me,
Awkwafina.
I don't want Awkwafina on it. I got problems with Awkwafina and just,
Oh, okay, fair enough.
just like I don't know. Awkwafina basically like uses like this black scent as like an aesthetic, and then when she makes it big, she ditches it entirely, and it's just like that's not cool. I don't like that.
Fair.
But I mean that's a whole other episode. But I mean like we gotta call that shit out as Asians, because there is that historical tension that we talked about when we talked about the model minority myth. So yeah, there's some tension with me with Awkwafina there. But yeah, Simu Liu, Louis Tan, Keanu Reeves, Dave Bautista.
I want at least one lady.
I'm just gonna keep going because I'm not gonna limit myself to 5. I want like Michelle Yeoh. I want to play D&D with Michelle Yeoh. How cool would that be? How cool would that be? Right?
That would be wild.
And then like I would, literally every actor on Kingdom.
Yeah.
Literally every actor on Kingdom.
Okay, I would be quaking if that happened.
Yeah.
Or literally anyone who's on like Word of Honor.
Get Gong Jun. Oh my god.
Okay. If I were to pick one person, Chow Yun-fat. That's who I think would be really cool to play.
I don't know if I can handle it. I would just be like,
Yeah, did you hear he's like, yo, I'm donating my entire fortune to charity.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's just like, wow, Chow Yun-fat. Yeah, but yeah, Chow Yun-fat. That's my pick. Not Keanu. I'm sorry, Keanu. Chow Yun-fat. But anyways, I think what we should do is recommend pieces of Asian media that folks might want to try to dip their toes into to experience wuxia and maybe xinxia. Not to like shit on your question or anything, Steve.
No. I think it was good to call out that based on like my growing up and things like that, sometimes I do take this lens and it's valid. Doesn't mean it's not problematic. Like they can both be two things at once. Yeah. And I do appreciate kind of people giving thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I think it's important for us to have these conversations. And we've got that respect that we could kind of talk about these things live because it's important that these conversations happen. So like, yeah, if you're gonna do a Western thing, honestly, I think like you could do like John Wick or even like Kung Fu Panda.
So actually, I wanted, when I asked my question, my example would have been Kung Fu Panda because that is a Western piece of media, right? But it has this aesthetic and it tries really hard, and I feel that it comes from a place of love of the genre where like research and stuff has been done, but when you look at it, if you really look at it, it's like it's not Chinese, it's definitely Western, and like that's kind of okay because the themes are kind of like they understood what they were going for. They had a vision and they went for it, and it turned out to be a very, very interesting piece of media.
Yeah. I honestly, I really enjoy Kung Fu Panda. I think it's great.
I've never seen it.
I've never seen it.
It's a lot of fun.
So I would love to actually give you a quick synopsis. I have give me 120 seconds. I'll give you a quick synopsis. And you tell me if it's a wuxia theme or not. We start with our character who's Po, who is a fat mask presenting person. It's a panda. And it's voiced by Jack Black. So like Jack Black has talked about like fat phobia and like things like that, and like very much in love with their body. So we have this panda who is raised by this noodle vendor who is a goose or duck, doesn't matter. And that is the panda's father. And the panda loves these amazing martial artists, the tiger, the mantis, the monkey, the snake. And they are all trained by the rat, right? So in fact, the rat's name is Sifu. And it's like, okay, I see what you're doing here. And the panda eventually goes to this monastery and is like, I want to learn this. I'm going to be the dragon warrior, who's like this mythical thing, this like person who should exist to like keep the world from being destroyed. And the Sifu is like, you can't do any of the training that I want you to do. You can't do a push-up. You can't do any of these like physical things that I need you to do. You are basically useless and I have no way to train you. And the Sifu then looks back and contacts their master, who is a turtle. And the turtle is like, hey man,
Yo, Master Oogway.
you like, you can't make someone something they're not, right? Like peaches are peaches and pandas are pandas. Like you can't force it to be something else. And the Sifu is like, that's really wise. And then the turtle like dissipates and like becomes like cherry blossom petals and like vanishes into the ether. And then the Sifu remembers that they can just train Po based on what Po resonates with, which is food. And they connect through food. And Po learns and grows and actually learns some techniques and things like that. And at the very end, Po is able to find the ancient dragon scroll that has all of like ancient wisdom in it. And they find it, and the scroll is just gold, and there's nothing written on it. And eventually they're like, this is nothing. There's nothing here. It was all a trick. And then the big bad person eventually beats Po in a conflict, looks at the scroll, and they look at themselves, and the scroll is all gold, right? And they see themselves in the reflection. And the villain is like, there's nothing here. There's nothing, looking at their own reflection. And Po is like, no, the secret is ancient techniques are in yourself. The mirror is the ancient technique. And Po unlocks all of their martial ability and then defeats them in kung fu battle. And that's the end of them. And then goes back home to make noodles with his dad.
Kung Fu
So,
Panda
like, really
is
quick
very
synopsis.
wholesome, very wholesome, and I really enjoy it. That's actually a good one. So for Western movies, we've got Kung Fu Panda and John Wick.
So would you say, Johnny Egg, though, would you say that's like wuxia like themed?
I think it could be a wuxia film
I'd
for
have
kids.
to watch it.
There
be
in
honest.
the other Kung Fu Panda movies, they explore the wider world, and there is like an unorthodox character, and then there are clearly orthodox characters, and they have their different styles.
Yeah, I think so.
I
Because like
I
wuxia
honestly
stories
think
for
you would.
kids is also different from like wuxia in general. So
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
So I think we should go into the whole like Asian cinema. Like, if you were to pick one thing that's easily accessible, what would it be? Whether it be through streaming, like on like Netflix or Prime or wherever, or Hulu or whatever you watch.
Word of Honor.
I was gonna say Word of Honor.
The Untamed is also on it, and I think the Untamed has better.
The Untamed
subs.
is so campy.
I like Word
It's
of
so
Honor.
campy.
Yeah.
I
Word of Honor
couldn't
better.
sit through Untamed. And that's
Okay,
more
that's fair.
Shinsha.
Yeah, that's true.
That's more
It
Shinsha.
is.
If we're talking about wuxia only, I Word of Honor is enjoyable. Legend of Condor Hero, but only the specific one that has Zhou Xun in it. They do this. So the popularity of like Condor Heroes is that they remake the trilogy at least once every decade. There's like 5 different versions of it. I think one version's on, like the version that I personally like is on YouTube, but may have been on Amazon Prime at some point.
I've never watched. I actually never watched any of the Condor Heroes, nor have I read it. I've only read. Wait, which one is the couple, and which one is the other Condor one?
Se Diao is a legend, and then there's Return, which is the second one with
Yes. So
Yang Guo.
I've read Se Diao, so the Legend of Condor.
Yeah,
Heroes.
Legend of Condor Heroes. Yeah, that one is the first one, and
That
the
one's
Return
hype.
in the second one, and then they do a little bit of time jump. And Heaven's Sword and Dragon Saber is actually the third one.
Oh yeah, I've also read that one. I skipped the middle one because I was too young at that point to care about romance, and then like the adults in my life were like, oh yeah, that one's the romance one. I was like, ew, gross. So I never read it.
That one's my favorite one. It has my
Saws.
favorite character.
All saws.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely recommend watching them if you don't want to read it. But yeah, Word
What
of
about
Honor.
like just movies? Because like what other things that are on Netflix
You know what?
right now? Like
Okay,
the
so
Ip Man
I've got an
style.
interesting like Ip Man. Obviously, I think is a fantastic wuxia movie that I think is like universally acclaimed. If you're looking for something really different, I recently watched one. By recently within like the last year, watched one called Brotherhood of Blades.
That one's good.
That was very good.
That one's good.
But it explores something that is you don't see in a lot of like mainstream, well-known wuxia movies, and that the main characters of Brotherhood of Blades are the
The
Jin Yi
government
Wei,
people.
but specifically
They're the secret
specifically
cops.
the secret police of the was it the Ming government.
Yeah, they're the secret cops of some
But they were
dynasty.
like corrupted
was Ming.
stuff. Is
Yeah.
Ming.
Yeah.
And so like Brotherhood of Blades, there's two of them. Cool action scenes. And it's very much got the sort of wuxia elements we talked about. But like I guess counter to my initial question, it's like, oh, you know, they're the government.
But it's
Yeah,
still no. But the thing is that we didn't really touch on this, and we're kind of out of time. But it just because it's a government doesn't make
Yeah.
it not wuxia.
Yeah, which you said earlier.
Yeah, it's like when the bad guy is this like middle-aged out of shape looking eunuch, and then they suddenly like whip out a fan and start like battling the other characters. That's when you know. That's when you know this is a wuxia
That's why I have this
story.
fan. That's why this fan.
Yeah.
Yo, like fans are a weapon.
Oh wait,
By the way.
I work wuxia.
Oh, flute. Oh,
Wow, bring out the real weapon.
Yeah, the real weapons.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, there we go.
The bard. So for audio
Yeah.
listeners, this is a Chinese flute that was.
Oh my gosh, you play that Chinese flute and all of us would start coughing up blood.
Oh, that's like the biggest trope. When you're hurt, you have like cough of blood. It's like
Yeah. So this is.
and then you have to have like the blood like drip down your leg.
Yeah.
This is my grandfather's. And
wow.
My parents had
No
it.
way.
My grandfather got this in Taiwan.
Wow.
And I actually went to my parents' place to pick it up today, and I'm like struggling with it, and then Sarah, my partner, comes home and it's like, oh yes, I can make sounds with this, and I was like, oh, I'm so ashamed of myself.
Oh,
Shame on your family.
Dishonor
no
on you.
face to go see your grandfather now.
Yo, okay, so I've got a really cute sort of story to conclude when we talk about our lovely patrons. But okay, so we have Brotherhood of Blades. We've got the like Condor Heroes adaptations. We have John Wick, Kung Fu Panda, Ip Man. Anything else? Let's go for one more.
I'm going to throw out very recent Shadow on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Shadow.
yeah, great.
Yes.
Yep.
So
Shadow's an
Shadow
aesthetic.
sold itself as a wuxia, in my opinion. So
did.
watch that and like notice the nuances, like how people interact with each other and how the background actors and the setting
Mhm.
helps to show you what positions everyone has, their role in society, and then watch as they break them. I feel like that is very like key to wuxia.
It's also got the
Knowing that I'm an
mellow-
outsider looking in.
So much melodrama in Shadow.
Yeah,
So
and I think
much.
oh my gosh, I remember when it was screening at where I worked, and there were so many walkouts. Because, and the thing is, this is a great thing to recommend because like watching Brotherhood of Blades, which is like
It's an
high
action
octane
movie. It's an
action,
action
like
Yeah.
like nonstop. And then like Shadow is not what you would in the West call a kung fu movie, because a kung fu
Ooh.
movie is supposed to have like very fast action, not a lot of plot.
Slow
If there's
motion.
plot, that's a plus, but otherwise like we're here for like the practical effects. And Shadow is not that, and that was why we had so many walkouts, because people were like, I'm so bored, I came here for like a thing where people are going to keep punching each other, but they're just like,
Well, that's like Zhang Yimou's style, though. Like,
Yeah, it is
Hero
Zhang
has
Yimou's
the same
style.
pace-
Yeah.
Hero's the same pacing.
Oh, yeah,
Hero
Hero's
has
a good
its like
one.
own separate side issues, I think.
yeah.
But it's the same
like-
pacing.
Hero. Yeah.
But Shadow is a wuxia film.
Yeah.
So that's like where you can really get the full spectrum of like,
I think
what a
I
wuxia
also think it's
story
very
is.
accessible to Western audiences.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh.
don't come into it thinking it's going to be like a Jackie Chan film where you're going to see someone use a ladder to fight someone. Like, expect to see like a theater drama.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all the martial arts that you see, understand that is like part of the experience, but not the core of it.
I'd say like if you're gonna of all the things we mentioned, Shadow is like that like the most like
Aesthetic.
It's that aesthetic
Yeah.
movie.
It's his thing.
Yeah,
It's
it's his
true.
thing,
Yeah, that
right?
is Sangyumo's
I
thing.
will say like Hero, the fight scene between Jet Li and Donnie Yen in Hero is like peak
Oh.
wuxia for me.
Oh,
Honestly,
so
Daniel,
given that it's literally a psychic battle. It's a psychic
literally 1/4 of the Asian episodes has you mentioning this.
I know.
And like I love it.
Because I fucking love it.
It's so like good for it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I-
things that come up. Simu
What-
Liu. That
Simu
one
Liu.
scene in Hero.
The one. No,
But
it's actually not Simu Liu. It's Keanu Reeves, the one scene in Hero, and Louis Tan.
true.
Oh, that's true.
It's not Simu Liu. It's Louis Tan. If I had to pick, Louis Tan over Simu Liu all day.
Whoa.
Oh.
You heard it here
Look,
first.
Look, I think Simu Liu is a great guy. He's representing our community. But if I had to pick one of the two, just looks. Louis Tan. Come on, bro.
Oh, quick
He's
thing.
a-
Some
he's a
auto clip
Nivea
you mentioned
model.
the Swordsman. So quick thing, the Swordsman is
It's
a
Jin
movie
Yong.
adaptation. Huh?
Isn't that Smiling
Yes, Jin
Proud
Yong. It's a
Wander?
movie adaptation of Jin Yong, which they don't do a super good job of stealing. And I don't know if it's one or two that has Brigitte Lin as the antagonist, who is, by the way, my opinion, canonically trans representation in wuxia. Just to add some intersectionality.
There's also
in
a
there.
Swordsman TV show.
There's a
Oh,
lot.
I don't
of them.
know. I don't know anything.
And I know that Chow Yun-fat was in one of them adaptations.
He was. Oh my god, Tony
Yeah.
Leung was in one of the original Heaven Swords. I haven't seen that
I'm
one yet.
pretty sure that Chow Yun-fat is in
Oh
the
my God.
original Smiling
Oh
Proud
my
Wanderer
God.
TV show.
Oh my god, I had to dig that out. I gotta dig that out.
1984, Chow Yun-fat's right on that poster. This dude has not aged. This dude has not aged. It's
Asian but
awesome.
raisin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clipped.
Yeah.
The swordsman is basically taken, right? The
Huh?
swordsman who's going blind is forced to raise his
No.
sword again to save
Swordsman
his
is Xiao
daughter?
Zhanghu.
Oh, I'm looking at
You're looking at the wrong one.
The Korean one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
He's just taken like the Liam Neeson movies.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
This plot is literally that. Sorry.
You know what? You
anyway.
know what's actually interesting? There are also some like wuxia. Okay, controversial. Interesting because of his roots in the wuxia genre. John Woo's 80s Hong Kong blood opera movies feature a lot of wuxia themes, which I'm thinking
Sure.
about now in like Hard Boiled,
Yeah.
The Killer, have a
Yep.
lot of that wuxia elements to them, given that John Woo actually made his early career doing wuxia movies, which a lot of people don't know. I think is interesting. But that said, we have reached a certain point in our show where we thank our amazing patrons for their support. And I wanted to tell all of you a story, a wuxia story that I've been holding on to, actually,
Oh my God.
until this episode. And I promise it'll be worth it. So one of the reasons why I'm like super careful about going out and doing all that stuff is that like a lot of my family is like, they're vulnerable. And one is my grandfather. And my grandfather, my gongong, so that's on my mom's side of the family, he was like really into martial arts and a practitioner of like kung fu for like his entire life. And he would have stories about how he owned restaurants all over Toronto as one of the first Chinese restaurant owners in Toronto, talking about how him and his kung fu buddies used to walk around with weapons in Chinatown and like talk about how like my grandma used to talk about how she would have a bowl with salt and pepper in it to throw at people's faces if they got too rowdy. But I haven't been able to see him in a long time. And last year, he basically went through some health problems, and we all thought that he was going to pass away. And this was very much before COVID. And I thought I wasn't going to ever see him again. He's still around now and still kicking it. And he, talks to my mom every day, and we try to go see him. And last time I saw him, I was telling him, I was like, oh, I've been learning about wuxia and watching a lot of shows. And he was like, his eyes lit up. and he's not very mobile right now, so he's kind of sitting in one of those walkers that you can sit on. And I was like, yeah, like I'm reading about wuxia, and I'm actually reading a manhwa called Blood and Steel, which is super cool if you're interested in wuxia. And I was telling you about like, the stuff that Sarah and I are watching, and then he sat there, and then he just started throwing punches because we were like, oh, watching wuxia, and I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna like freak out. And it was like one of the best 2021 memories for me is literally talking to my grandfather about finally learning about wuxia, and then seeing him react that way, given that there's a lot of like family drama and stuff that I won't get into, but like it, like telling him that I was learning about wuxia like filled him with life. And it was like it was just like
I know.
It was just like really cool. So I wanted to share that with you folks. And I'm, the reason why we're doing so much wuxia is because I'm prepping for our eventual wuxia or xinsha show that we're going to do through our Patreon. So, I have so much, Agatha and I have so much gratitude for, everyone who supports us on Patreon. Even if you're at the lowest tier and you're not on the screen, we really appreciate you. We, shout out to like those disciples and like our guardians, Brooke Bright, Pixel Grotto, Daisy May. We really appreciate you. And I wouldn't have gotten this moment. I'm not shitting you or anything like that. I wouldn't have gotten this moment with my grandfather if I hadn't been trying to do Asians Represent stuff for patrons and looking up wuxia. So shout out to all of you, and then our most honorable patrons, Ryan the Wizard Hall, Metal Weave Games, Andreas, you were in the chat earlier, Valorous Games, Liana, we got Karatur coming up, Dungeon Glitch, Matt, and then of course our most honorable Epic Impulse. Marla is here. Marla has her own sect. She is a master of the Marla arts. And so there's
wow,
Marla.
she is not having
She
a good time.
hates this.
She does not like this. Mwah, we love you, Marla. Marla, do you want to say hi to everyone?
I can see Marla just clawing into Sarah. It's like, get me out of here.
Oh yeah,
What are you
she's
doing?
definitely gonna do that.
Her posture is so like.
Mwah. We love you, Marla. Okay, Marla's gonna pee or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, just wanted to thank all of you for your support on Patreon. It means a lot. We're gonna try to put in a new Patreon goal and maybe move up our Shinsha series to a different goal. But we already hit our first one. We had our first Bubble Tea Book Club, and that was awesome. So I'm really excited. Patreon has also enabled us to like get you tools and resources to do other shows. Tomorrow we've got Karatur. I unfortunately will not be able to be there, but Agatha is going to run the show there, and Agatha is also running point on a recording that Steve is leading.
Oh, you opened up that can of worms. I for all our listeners here, I'm so happy that I got a chance, Daniel, to be part of this community, to work and to build these bonds and express myself in a way that was authentic and genuine, that you allowed me to have space to have a Vietnamese-centric episode. Our first Vietnamese-centered episode, where I have some amazing guests, some fucking amazing guests. We're going to talk about being Vietnamese in this space. And I have no words. I've already expressed my guests that I'm a little starstruck, a little anxious,
we got some
a little nervous.
Awesome guests.
But also very thankful and gratuitous or gracious that I get this opportunity. And all my guests, surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, share similar feelings. And I think that just speaks the Vietnamese diaspora.
Yeah, it's an episode that we really need to do. I'm excited that it's happening. I'm hyped that Agatha is learning some new skills and taking care of that. So I appreciate you, Agatha, for doing that, because one of the big things with Asians Represent is that it was just like literally becoming like, I don't want to say like a burden, but really difficult to maintain for me. So now that we could do that, that means we could do more episodes. So we'll actually, Steve, since you're running the show, I don't know if our patrons are on our patron Discord area. If they have questions for you, we'll create a thread there, Steve, so they can ask any questions. You're dictating the topic, so I don't know what the questions would be about. But yeah, I'm hyped for that, Steve. I'm hyped for Character. Tomorrow's Character is actually going to be a little bit different because it's going to be a world building episode, and we're not actually reading Character. We're actually doing some world building and literally making a small little village in like a fantasy China, and it will be one of many world building episodes where we'll do like a Vietnamese one, we'll do like a South Asian one. I want to do so many of these. So tomorrow's going to be the first one. I've already written out my part. I created like a little like a restaurant called the Tiger and Crow, and I think it's going to be really cool. So I'm hyped that we're going to be doing that live. Now I see in the chat that folks were referencing a previous episode on Wuxia. It's if you go to our audio feed, it's the only Wuxia episode there. I forget which number it is. Actually, I can find out because we hella organized here at Asians Represent. It is episode 24 of the podcast. That was released November 20th, 2020. So you can check that out on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you're looking for, the audio or extended audio of this one, it's going to be exclusive to our patrons, whose support we, really, 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 really value. Y'all are awesome. But yeah, that said, let's wrap this up. Johnny, thank you for joining us for this
Thank
episode.
you guys so much for having me again.
I'm hyped to have you on again. We'll do something. We gotta do more of this.
Yeah, Johnny, the ghost episode, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Do you want to do a ghost episode with us?
No.
I'm serious though.
I'm kidding. No, Johnny doesn't like.
I am such a big scaredy cat. I'm
no, but we're not doing
I'm
the.
kidding,
We're not.
kidding.
We're not. That was not going to be on the Southeast Asian ones because those are too scary. We also need an expert for that. I'd say we just do the Chinese ones.
That's still scary.
Oh,
Johnny,
okay, sorry.
I'm going to invite you to a game of There's Ghosts in this Discord, and we're going to play it with 10 of us, 12 of us. And it's a game built for 12 people.
Honestly,
details incoming.
Honestly, I think a really good episode.
Poor Johnny.
I think a good series would honestly be let's talk about creatures from different Asian cultures.
Yeah.
That'd be hella cool. I got
We
a
have
lot
a lot
of
of Southeast Asian people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and South
I
Asian
learned
stuff
about
too.
that.
That so underrepresented. Honestly, it's talking about creatures, and I say creatures and not monsters because that term is very specific to certain things. So let's figure something out like that. But that said, Johnny, I'm super grateful that you were here. Steve, thank you for being vulnerable, and I think it's really good that we can, disagree, air quotes, live on things like that. And of course, Agatha, you're always you're always dope. Bring in the knowledge, and always critical of D&D, and I think in a constructive way, which I think is important. That said, folks, we'll see you next time on Asians Represent. We've got so many recordings coming up. We've got Steve's episode on Vietnamese culture and TTRPGs. I'm doing a remote recording next Saturday with some of the Al-Qadim crew on fashion. So we're going to talk about the use of clothing as simple aesthetic and how problematic that can be. Very similar to what we're talking about with flavors of fantasy. But we're taking it to the next level. I'm hyped for that. I'm hyped for those voices to be back on Asians Represent. We wish, Amar a speedy recovery because Amar is ill right now. So send Amar those good vibes. That said, folks, we'll see you next time. Stick around if you're watching us live on Twitch because we're going to go raid another Asian creator. Peace out, everyone.